Procrastinophobic. Hi, it's Ramdane. You are on Procrastinophobic, the pseudo radio show, the show that interviews people who do things. Hello everyone. This week a new interview with this amazing architect and designer James Wines. I think he's 92 years old or 96, I don't know, I forgot. But very interesting interview talking about his design. The guy is big revolutionary in our world. Quality of the sound, not sure because it was via Zoom. Of course, I cannot go to America and you know the reason. And please listen it, it's amazing. James, first question. Where did you born and when?
Chicago, Illinois, USA.
In which year?
Oh, 1932. So I'm 92.
Wow. What did you study at school?
Just conventional education, really, basically. But yeah, I was always very interested in art anyway. Even as a child, I started very early. So I always was inclined to go where artistic opportunities existed. Teachers were sympathetic and that sort.
How did you decide and when did you decide to become a designer?
Well, I started as a visual artist. I was a sculptor for a long time and up and through the 60s. And, I had quite a reputation and I was doing very well. I befriended Frederick Kiesler during his last years of his life. And he really liked my work because I had an architectonic feeling. And he always was saying, James, you should probably do some more with architecture. You really seem to have a feeling for it. And then he looks around my studio, and I was, very influenced by modernism and constructivism like everybody else. And he said, well, do you really want to do this old-fashioned abstract art anymore? It's been around for 100 years. He says, all the best work has been done. And it had a real impact. I looked around, and I said, no, not really. And that changed my whole direction. I started getting more and more interested in architecture and interior design and public space design in particular.
What was your first design of space project?
Well, I would say the first public space we did was the Ghost parking lot in Connecticut. It was basically a shopping center parking lot, and the director was an art collector. And he said, well, you got to do some sculpture in my parking lot. I said, at that time, I was already beginning to realize I didn't really want to do object art anymore. I didn't want to do plop art, as I called it. And so we looked at the whole parking lot, and I said, well, what about cars? And there were no cars where the area that he was showing us. So what we did is we buried about 24 cars under the paving and then asphalted over the paving. So it's called the Ghost parking lot. And that was where the asphalt was over cars. And it became very famous very quickly. And one thing led to another.
When was it?
Oh, that was 1976, 77, something like that.
Is this parking still exist?
Oh, no, it was gone. Well, the problem with working in the commercial world, one major problem is there always is conversions and they're always tearing down everything and building it again. So our work in general has suffered from being, the idea, of course, to be part of the junk world, to use the junk world as the subject matter. And so what happened is that, if they changed the whole shopping center, they just took it all away. So that's what happened. It got destroyed about 10 years later.
When did you start to make these malls? And how this idea of this destruction, post-apocalyptic or earthquake arrived?
It's not so much it was ever apocalyptic. It's kind of proven to be sort of prophetic now in a way. But really, what we started with, for example, Best Products buildings, and then subsequently with the showrooms for Willie Smith and recently Virgil Abloh. Whatever it was going to be, it had to be that the product itself would tell you a lot of stories. It would tell you about itself. It would tell you about the author or the designer. And so everything was contextual. I mean, that was the main reason we did things. That instead of working formally and like most architects, form, space, structure, so with that, we worked with basically ideas using those contexts as a sort of a subject matter. I always said that we always like to put kind of art where you would least expect to find it. And the American shopping center was a totally junk world, of course. And to take that raw material and convert it into something else, so that would have another meaning. And the meaning was always very much related to the products, whatever the products were, whatever they're selling, whether it was fashion or whether it was hard goods or whatever. In a funny way, it was like criticism of architecture. It was like a built critique of architecture. And of course, the architecture world was amazed we could ever get away with it. But we did, and so one thing led to another.
Procrastinophobic on Pseudo Radio.
Grave architecture. Grave architecture.
How did you explain to your client, listen, I'm going to do your mall. You know what? It's like a bit destroyed. Imagine your mall after an earthquake. How do you explain that to the client who's expecting nothing but that?
Well, we had both of David Romance, who did the Ghost parking lot, and the Best Buildings, the ownership was the Best Company, they were all big art collectors. So they already had a disposition to understand what we're going to do. They weren't fighting it. But it was difficult. It was very, very, there are many stories. For example, one time, Sidney Lewis, who was the president of the Best Company, was getting a big objections to the building that you were talking about in Houston that seems to be collapsing or whatever. So he said, James, you're going to have to come to my board meeting and meet with my other executives to explain what you're doing. So I came to the meeting and I showed the pictures and the model. The first thing one of his executives said was, Mr. Wines, if you do a building like that, no one will ever go in it. He was very wrong, because when that building opened, there was lines of cars all the way down the highway, because it had already, gotten a lot of attention. And it was one of his most profitable buildings, of course, because it was different. It was in a sense, a criticism of architecture, making fun of architecture, an inversion of architecture. So it was many things that formal design is not. Most architects, in their designing for fashion or for almost anything, they always start with formally designing the space, shape making, form making, space making. Those are the big priorities. In my case, it's been the absolute opposite. It was always the idea behind it. What else could it? In fact, my new book is going to resolve. We're doing a book for Skira right now. It's called "What Else Could It Mean?" And that's the question I asked all my life.
If I can lighten the browns in this sand and rub it right into where the sky is reaching down, so it's like the edge of a mirror. But this blue needs to be darker, much darker. Maybe if I can just blend it a bit. Yes, that might do.
I was going to ask you the importance of humor in your job. Are you laughing by yourself when you're designing? You say, oh, it's going to be very funny when we're going to have it.
No, it was as soon as we got going, our site became a pretty big firm pretty quickly. We opened an office and we opened another office. And we had, I guess the most we ever had was 30, 40 people maybe. But we definitely were very collective organization. I really liked the dialogue we would have when we start a new project. And that was a question I always asked, because, so many young architects, snap out their computer. And, as soon as a computer programmer is designing your building, to me, it means nothing. So I always would ask, I say, stop. Forget the computers. What is this all about? What's it mean? What could we say here? So it was a very different point of view, a very different way of working. And it was very cooperative because everybody then had ideas and would kick in this and kick in that, and it grew in that sort of organic way.
Are you still productive? Are you still designing stores?
We're doing a museum in Holland now. They're building something like the Dia Art Center. It's a park full of industrial buildings, and it's going to be sort of like a big showcase at Beacon, New York. They're converting the buildings for different contemporary art, modern contemporary art, and we're doing an introduction building to the whole thing. We're to have a cafe and a bookstore, and it will show very large paintings. So the collection is, people like John Chamberlain, for example, has a section already finished, and it will be that kind of a museum. So we're doing the design and some of the planning for that project right now in Holland. And then, we've been doing small projects, houses and landscapes and things like that.
Because you do also garden.
Most of our projects, one of my big interests is public space. And of course, now in the world, anything with some sympathy toward the environment is a good thing. People are going to commit suicide the way they're building structures right now. It's not sustainable, the whole structure. So the more sustainable it is, and the more it involves grass and trees and bushes, and as they say, it's true. One tree means 4 people can breathe. That's a fact. So you obviously are much more interested in including nature, including trees, and mixing it in so that they become organic of nature rather than against nature.
Keep your ears wide open. This is Procrastinophobic.
Was it always a point for you, this nature question, or this idea of ecology came much later?
We started in the late 70s. We did a building called the Forest Building for Best Products, in which we built the building around the trees. In other words, trying to cut down all these beautiful trees, we built the building. So the trees grow right to the middle of the building, and we preserved a lot of the landscape. So the Forest Building was really a green building. It was really with that intention. And it proved to be very beneficial because the trees shaded the building, so they used a lot less air conditioning, for example. It was very pleasant. And I think that became the most profitable building they ever had because people loved, they would be up on the outside where there's vegetation. Then they would start walking inside, go see a forest. And they would sit in the forest and have lunch. And then they would go in and buy something, come back and have a coffee. And they remember they forgot something, so they got to buy some more. So it was very popular. It became a center for human activity.
You are listening to Procrastinophobic.
Landscape is changing, landscape is crying.
How do you feel that your work became institutional? Like people travel from all over the world to see your work. How do you feel like Tower Eiffel, kind of like it's going to be in the future, but Statue of Liberty? What's your feeling about that?
First started, it was very controversial. And, we got articles in magazines, and the next issue of the magazine, we've come all kinds of protest letters from the AIA. Well, we always said, this isn't real architecture, or this isn't marginal architecture, or, we had a difficult time, but we had good clients. That was one thing. If you have a client who has some faith in you.
They trusted you.
Yeah, they were. And then, one thing led to another. And of course, when people find they can get much more attention for a building, for an interior or a landscape, if they do something interesting, which is pretty obvious, they began to like it. I mean, even more conventional clients began to say, well, that's not a bad idea. If people come to see something, if they travel out of their way to see it, then if you're in commercial merchandise or something, they're obviously going to buy more at your place or your public space or your building or your interior than where it's boring. So,
Keep your ears wide open. This is Procrastinophobic.
If you have to give advice to a young architect or designer, what kind of advice right now you will give him?
well, boy, it's very difficult in the world today. I don't want to get into politics, but you can imagine where my position is. Many people, and I'm included, of course, I'm 92 and I've never, ever seen this kind of political disaster in the USA that's going on today in my whole life. Nothing like it. We knew we had good presidents, bad presidents. We've made big mistakes. Every country has. But never have I seen anything as destructive as what's going on right now. It's frightening. It really is. So it's very hard to, in fact, I just contributed to a book exactly that. This is going to be a new book in which they asked me and a number of other professionals, how do you survive today, kind of thing. And we all wrote the best we could. It's very, very difficult because so many of the values, culturally, artistically, sociologically, economically, are being just hacked away. They're just being chopped up in little pieces. So it's very difficult to give good advice. I mean, I would say be as creative as possible, of course, but creativity is being damaged. And so it's a hard question to ask. It's a key question. You're answering probably the most important question of all right now.
Yeah, what do you think about this new technology, AI, who attempt to replace human on the last thing that we enjoy, which is creativity?
Well, the thing about it is I'm doing some lectures on AI now because, there is always this, it's going to take over the human brain and everything. It's really not. It's another tool, another valuable tool. But what it does is, in a linear digital system, it collects known information. It's not creative. It can only measure and think of things that are already known and given. The human brain doesn't work that way. As I'm giving a lecture on it now, the human brain, I have a statistic, is 250 million billion times more complex than the most complex computer. It isn't always used, of course, but nevertheless, the human brain functions in a completely different way than a computer. For example, the digital world, they can't smell, it can't hear, it can't see, it can't have indigestion, it can't have a sex life. They can't. All of these things are missing from digital structure. And it's those elements, those indeterminate, ambiguous elements that give the human brain the possibility of being creative. That is the bottom line to the human brain. So I don't think we're going to be competing with it. I think it's just going to be a great tool to have.
You use this tool? Did you use it?
The whole computer revolution came in during my lifetime, so I'm very bad at it. It came too late for me to have it organically part of my life. I use computers, of course, like everybody else, but I'm not technically skilled at all. And I use people who are, of course. I mean, there are young people. But as they say, every 7-year-old is a person who really knows how to handle computers these days.
Procrastinophobic on Pseudo Radio.
Just a personal question. What's your parents were doing? What was the job of your parents?
They never really understood what I was doing. They thought I was crazy, but they would come to these openings and ceremonies and honor awards and all kinds of stuff. And they were always very proud of what I was doing, but they could never really understand what it was all about. Because for them, architecture was a very conventional format. And what I was doing was obviously comments on architecture. It was more about commentary on architecture than it was about architecture itself.
You ever had clients who decided to don't work with you because they didn't understand your question, your project?
Sometimes, of course, we had clients who were just hiring us because we had a famous name in our office, and so you had to explain a lot, and sometimes it was very difficult. I got pretty good at it. And one thing I always did, I do hand drawings all the time. So very often when the client was sitting in front of me, I would start sketching what he was saying. And when I was drawing and he was thinking, and we got together, and in a funny way, I could educate the client just by sketching what he was saying. And this is how we might interpret it, In other words, if it's a fashion designer, you don't want your clothes just hanging there on a rack. You want something of your whole creative abilities, your fashion statement. And we worked, as you know, for Willie Smith, who was a first great Black American fashion designer. And he wanted to do really hip-hop. He was the father of hip-hop clothing as well, where you could be fashionable without spending a lot of money. And he said always very politically, I don't design clothes for the Queen. I design clothes for the people who watch the Queen go by. So when we started out with him, I said, well, what do you like? And he said, well, I'll take all of these gay clubs I go to, and I'll show you, they're all falling down. They're all junk. The last person I want to look like is Ralph Lauren. So we did the opposite. We made his entire showroom out of street stuff, just junk we dragged off the street and made it into a whole kind of a streetscape showroom. And he liked it, and we worked for them about 4 or 5 years. We did all their offices. We did Willie Smith's office, personal office. We did 5 showrooms, and something in London as well. So it was a very good match because he understood perfectly. He was a really avant-garde designer, and he liked the idea that his showrooms didn't look like anybody else's.
If someone doesn't know your work, which places you will advise him to go to visit?
Riasco, an art foundation in Riasco. You can visit that one, yeah. They partially destroyed it. Again, it was supposed to be completely consumed by nature. And a few years ago, they started cutting back trees and plants and everything. So I don't know what it looks like now. I can send you pictures of everything in the whole building. It was very ecological because all the materials, everything came from about 10 kilometers of the building. The glass, the vegetation.
Where is it?
Riasco, Italy.
In Italy?
Near Lake Como.
What I like to ask, and I love to ask this question to mainly people who are more than 80 years old, what are your future projects?
Oh boy, that's very difficult too, because that's all speculation. It's so difficult. As I say, this is probably one of the most difficult times I've personally had, I'm sure many creative people are having, of what do you do next? Usually there was never a question of what you do next is, in a sense, watching the world change favorably and then try to step into that world. Now we're watching into a world that seems to be going crazy. So it's very difficult to make something positive and something interesting and something conceptually lasting out of something that's so apocalyptic. It's like, you could write a novel about it or something, or criticize it in political writing, but it's very difficult to be a creative designer and somehow reflect that kind of environment or even counter that kind of environment. It's funny because right now I would say I'm getting more letters from young people in their 20s than any older people. In fact, I almost don't speak to people in my own age group anymore. And it's interesting because it's, the ideas are being discovered. They really are. And I've always believed, I'm a great fan of Marcel Duchamp, of course, and Dadaist surrealism and everything. And I really realized that Oscar Wilde said it so well. An idea that isn't dangerous isn't worthy of being called an idea. And that's so true. And so I always encourage everybody to have interesting ideas. That's the main thing. Don't just do somebody else's style or somebody else's tradition, because there's so many traditions that have been done too often.
Thank you very much. You know what? We did an interview with 15 designers. You're the youngest and the coolest by far, trust me.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
You just listened to Procrastinophobic with Ramdane Touhami.